Hi everyone, Steven here. Before we get started with episode 416, I wanted to let you know that I had some technical difficulties, also known as user errors, during the production of the show, which resulted in below standard audio for us. We've done our best to clean this up, and it doesn't take away from how good the information is from Mike and Mateu. So apologies to all who participated and who are listening. Let's move on with the show.
This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 416, Single Directory Components. On today's show, we're talking about single directory components in Drupal, how they differ from web components, and what are their benefits, with Mateu Bosch and Mike Herchel. We'll also cover Component Library's theme server as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests today are Mateu Bosch and Mike Herchel. Mateu is the admin of the Drupal.community Mastodon server, original author of the JSON API and single directory components core modules, and maintainer of more than 80 Contrib modules. Mateu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
He's joined by none other than Mike Herchel. Mike is a senior front-end developer at, say that for me, Mike.
Angelina.
Angelina, thank you. As well as a maintainer of Drupal core's CSS subsystem and default theme. He's a big believer in free open source software and the open web. Mike Herchel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And Angelina, we're hiring too. So if anyone is listening to this, check out our website and go there.
All 5 of our listeners will apply.
Thank you.
I should also say welcome back, Mike, because Mike has joined us before.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM. And today, my co-hosts are joining us for the next 4 weeks. Jen Lampton, owner at Generation Web Development.
Thanks, Mike. Hello.
Jen's an open source advocate, web team and project lead, a Drupal provisional security team member, Backdrop CMS co-founder, an expert avocado surgeon, which we'll have to get into at some point, loves animals, and likes houseplants. That's awesome. What is your favorite houseplant, Jen?
Right now, I have a Arabian sunset begonia that I grew from like a little tiny leaf cutting, and it's massive, and so it's my favorite because it's doing the best.
That's awesome. Yeah, I admittedly kill things. Let me rephrase that. I kill plants. So I'm into very maintenance things like orchids, and I'm not friends.
It's okay. Right. I kill orchids too. So.
I think there's a very special type of person. Maybe we can do a talking orchids at some point and talk all about that with an expert. So we actually have a special guest host today. Nick is off on vacation, hopefully relaxing and having some fun. Jumping in for him, filling his seat, is Stephen Cross, founder of Talking Drupal.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. You know, I think Nick has only missed 2 episodes in 10 years, 416 episodes. You know, that's pretty impressive.
We won't let him forget it. How dare you? This is the show.
This is the show that's going to go off the rails, too.
I can see it coming.
It's already starting.
Probably true. The New England Drupal community invites you to join us at NedCamp, the New England Drupal Camp, celebrating its 10th year on November 17th and 18th in Providence, Rhode Island. Friday features trainings as well as an all-day higher education summit, and Saturday is a day full of sessions. Speaking of sessions, NedCamp is accepting session and training submissions until September 25th. Visit nedcamp.org to submit your session or training topic, purchase tickets, and learn more about the camp. The New England Drupal community and Talking Drupal team hope to see you in November at NedCamp.
Thanks, Mike, and we look forward to seeing our listeners at NedCamp. And now, to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to use a component library like Storybook in your Drupal site without the limitations of Twig.js? There's a module for that. It's called Component Libraries theme server. It was created in January 2022 by one of today's guests, Mateu Bosch, and it has 1.0.0 RC5 and 2.0.0 Beta 3 versions available, the latter of which supports Drupal 9 and 10. Now, it is actively maintained. In fact, the most recent commit was earlier this month. In terms of open issues, it has 9 open issues, 2 of which are bugs against the 2.x branch, which is pretty good considering the module is in use by over 1,500 sites. The module works by allowing you to develop your components in your preferred component library and use them in Drupal. It is notionally agnostic of the component library solution, but the main integration really is with Storybook, including support for things like knobs, which are dynamic properties in your components, stories, which capture interesting states of a component to sort of show and test the ways in which a component can be used. There is also a companion add-on for Storybook to make it aware of your Drupal site. Now, within Storybook, it allows you to preview components rendered through your Drupal themes, so the rendering is always consistent between Storybook and Drupal. It allows your Storybook components to use Drupal-style JavaScript, and there is also a companion module called SDC Story Generator that can automatically convert a Drupal single directory component.yaml definition to a Storybook component story format, stories.yaml file for a smoother integration. So let's talk about Component Libraries theme server.
I really just want to hear you say that last bullet one more time fast. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So I guess my first question here, and may or may not be a popular one, is this seems like it's pretty Drupal twig focused. Is that accurate? If I were using like a decoupled front end, would I be able to kind of use this to link those, my Drupal to my Storybook to my front end as well?
It is completely Drupal focused. Like
Okay.
it's actually the point.
Yeah.
Because like what we've realized over the years is that we were trying to emulate what Drupal will do when rendering this particular component, and that's hard. Like it's admittedly very hard because we are writing PHP extensions and then we have to emulate them in JavaScript, and then you enable a Contrib module and you don't know that those extensions come in. So the solution that I proposed in that module is to just use Drupal. Drupal knows how to render Drupal. So
right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And clearly it's very popular. 1,500 sites are using it, right? Has anybody on the call, well, other than Mateu and maybe Mike, has anybody else used this module or interacted with component libraries in this way? Silence. Okay. All right, fair enough. And Storybook specific, Mateu? Just working with Storybook, or is there a way or ability to extend it to some other component library service?
It is theoretically agnostic to the component library that you use. Admittedly, I don't know of anyone that is using this module and not using Storybook.
Right.
I like Storybook a lot. I would even go further and say it's the best in their space. So
makes sense. And I'm pretty sure it's widely used. I know there was another component library out there early on, which the name is escaping me, but it seems to have dwindled in popularity, maybe, or
Pattern
the support.
Lab, maybe?
Pattern Lab, that was
Yep.
it. I have not heard much about Pattern Lab lately, so. Okay, Martin, any other fun facts or anything else about this module we should know?
I think if anybody had more to share, it would probably be Mateu, but yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. I honestly haven't had much chance to play around with Storybook, but hopefully in the future, when I get the chance, I'll definitely give this a try.
I know that the knobs piece of it is actually interesting because I know. So I'm on a project, we use Storybook, and we have, configuration within Storybook to give designers the ability to say, oh, this is what it's going to look like if it's blue, or this is what it's going to look like if you use the right versus the left. And that aspect of it is pretty cool. And to be able to kind of integrate that into Drupal better would be awesome. So definitely a good set of features there. I think I can understand why so many people are using this.
One thing that I like as well is that it allows QA engineers to break your components very fast, like really easy if they have to. And also, it's a good tool to pair with visual regression for QA, because you have Storybook that generates different renderings of your same component, and you do visual regression on that.
That's a great point too. Yeah, you could jump in there, set a couple knobs, and then be like, "Hey, this thing doesn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board." Right.
So I'm guessing that that this module you don't enable on production. It's completely development only, correct?
Yeah, for now it is. So there is a valid use case that could be like, I want to show my component library to the world. Like, I don't know, the European government will do that, right? So others can know what it looks like. But right now that is not supported because we are kind of disabling a lot of the caching protections that Drupal uses, so you can work kind of comfortably in your local.
I envision this being used like, to Mike's point, like with almost like a statically generated front end where you're like building components on the back end and you're using this integration, and then it's like static and people are using it on the front end. But yeah, that might be one use case of many, right? All right. Well, as always, thanks, Martin, and let's move on to our primary topic. Mike Herchel. Actually, no. Mateu, I'm gonna what? No? You want it?
No. I get it. It's cool. I don't want to talk about single directory components.
I think John just chose me.
You are the chosen one.
There you go. All right, Mateu, the big question, the $1 million question, if you will, for this episode. What are single directory components?
I defer that to Mike.
John has not chosen me, so it's going to go back to you.
All right. Well, single directory components is just a way of implementing components in Drupal. Like, that's the simple answer, and probably not very nuanced, but components is a thing that's been out there in the web industry for a long time. And Drupal didn't have a formal way of implementing it. From what I've gathered during all this journey, everyone was doing it. Like, so many people were doing this, and everyone was doing it in a slightly different way. Not very different, because like it is what it is. Like, components are way to encapsulate semantic elements that then you put on your pages, right? And we have the template system, which is kind of the integral part of it. And then we know how to add JavaScript, CSS, and assets in Drupal. So kind of making that combination, the way that we do the combination is our proposal of single directory components.
So it's like kind of it's like taking a step back here, right? It's kind of like there are two ways to think of components, right? Or at least maybe for me, and this might be a gross simplification. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like, we used to think of components as like, hey, you're working with a design system. The design system has, atomic design principles, dictate like atoms. And then you get to like a component level, right? Where it's more of like an interaction point or a group of atoms together, right? And then that kind of merged or migrated, I guess I should say, from like the design world to the development world, right? And like, and it's been a while since I've themed a Drupal site, so bear with me here, folks. But like Drupal theming to me always felt like, okay, you have your Twig template, you have your CSS and your JavaScript that support that Twig template. And then, basically that CSS and JavaScript's usually all in like one massive file. And then your Twig template's in like some sort of, template directory, right? This feels like a better way to organize those things, right? Where you have your Twig template, your JavaScript, your CSS, all in one, air quotes, directory folder, right? That says, hey, here's the component name, and here's all the stuff that supports that. Is that a fair way of describing this?
Yeah. And it gives you some additional benefits too. So like, let's say that you have a component, your component has, your Twig file, your CSS file, a Sass file that will generate that CSS file, your JavaScript file in there. And in addition to, like, it's all together. So let's say you want to take that component and you just want to copy and paste that from one theme to another. It's just easy peasy lemon breezy. You just copy, you paste it, you make your modifications to your CSS so it can pull in the new Sass variables or CSS variables that you need, and it'll just straight up work. SDC will automatically generate a library, like a kind of an auto-generated library for every single component, and automatically load that whenever the component is generated. In addition to all of that, as when you're creating an SDC, you have an option to create a schema for it. So the schema will like define like the data that the SDC is expecting. So like if you're a CTA, you'll have like maybe a title, some text, and then like a link, and the text link, and you define that. You say I'm getting this data, and it's a string. This data is a hyperlink. This data is, a Boolean or something like that. And what's really useful is that number one, that will that tells the developer what the SDC is expecting. But on top of that, in the future, and honestly, like right now, because Drupal is aware of what data that SDC is expecting, you can auto generate a form. Let's say you're in a CK editor, like there could be a module that you hit a button and you select an SDC, and then you populate the SDC with the data, and Drupal will know like what data it needs to collect and how to inject that into the SDC and stuff like that. And that's going to make, like, number one, the development experience a lot easier, because as I said, copying and pasting SDCs and being able to delete them when necessary without having to browse around. And then number two, like the site building experience is like once Contrib and Core catches up to this, it's just gonna dramatically accelerate that too.
Yeah, so I think a lot about, you talk about the site building experience, right? I think a lot about Layout Builder with SDCs, as you call them, which for those people that are keeping up, that's single directory components. It's an acronym, folks. Also, another acronym that Mike just used is CTA, which is call to action, which is for anybody that's not familiar with those. Okay, so this seems to make a lot more sense. A lot more sense to me.
Where did the idea of adding single directory components to Drupal come from?
That's you, Mateu.
Trying to see how far back we need to rewind for that. For us, Mike and I used to work together a lot, and we were at a project where we were using this kind of proto version or earlier version of single directory components. We were using Fractal, right? Mm-hmm. And then I had some time lying on my hands, and then decided, well, it would be nice if I could try to propose kind of a way to standardize doing this, right? Starting from there, now the code that we are running in Drupal core nowadays barely resembles the initial version, but it started out as client project implementation.
Yeah, and so Mateu took that client project and he made the module. It's called CL Components. And at one point, I think Mateu, like, I don't know if we were on a video call or something like that, and you were demoing it to me, and I'm like, dude, it'd be super cool if we could get this into Drupal core. And like Mateu, like he's done a lot of core work. I've done a lot of core work, and he was like, yeah, we probably could. So like, I talked to the product manager, Laurie Esco, a lot, and I proposed it to him. He's like, yes, it seems like a cool idea. So and by we I mean just like Mateu, like worked on it like pretty much all the time, and he was kind of busting his butt just doing this, and this was Drupal 10.0 was out, and we were kind of on a deadline, like a self-imposed deadline to make Drupal core 10.1, and it was a little hairy at times. We had like there was a little drama here and there, like as we're doing it, like I would constantly be like, he would do something and then record a video. I would blog about it, and like from my point of view, I was trying to get like the Drupal community very, very excited about this, with the express intention of putting pressure on the core committers to give it attention, to hopefully get this into Drupal 10.1. And so I would like, ping people on occasion if they haven't looked at it, be like, hey, gentle ping again, don't forget about this. Hey, I saw you left a review for this. Do you mind finishing that review? And a lot of things like this. And we ended up getting some like really quality reviews from people like Lee Rowlands and Alex Pott. Ended up coming back and making those changes and getting subsequent reviews. And then there was the point where it was around like April or something, and we were trying to get this into 10.1, and so finally we got it into 10.1. But what we realized when we got it into Drupal 10.1 is it was going in as 10.1 alpha, which means it wasn't actually going to be like an actual release. It was just going to be in like the Git branch. And so we were like, oh crap, what do we do now? And so like at that point, like I'm messaging like Mateu, like behind the scenes, and I'm like, hell or high water, we're gonna get this into the beta, and so like message Laurie, and we're trying to like figure out the list of stuff that we need to do, and long story short, we just get this done, and we get the thumbs up on that from Catch, and it got marked as beta, just like right under the 10.1 deadline. And so that was super exciting, a little bit stressful, but honestly fun.
We had a couple hours to spare.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to fill in some of the details that Mike left out, and he always says Mateu did all the work, and I think this was a very successful partnership. Like, this wouldn't be in Drupal core without Mike's involvement, whatever he says and he tells to anyone, because our agreement was, Mike, I'll do this. When he told me this should be in Drupal core, I'll do this if you deal with all the red tape, with all of the wrangling people around. I'll write the code. You do your social stuff to make people do the things that need to happen for this to go into core. And this is something that probably is valuable for anyone wanting to put something into core.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to do the code. You need a mic.
Yeah. You need to like get on the radar of the core committers. You need to like say like, this is valuable. Like there was one issue we had to open up, and they basically said, you have to do your due diligence. Is this the type of implementation of components that we want? Like, what do other systems do? Do you want to do single file components? Do we want to do single directory components? Do we want to do something else? And so we had to justify like pretty much every single architectural decision that we made. And so like a lot of stuff like that, but like a lot of this is just like finding out what is the next step. Like if it's just sitting there, we need to know what the next step is. And even if that next step is us doing extra work, well then, hey, then we're making progress.
Yeah, and luckily the process doesn't allow for anyone, especially me, coming here and saying, "Trust me, this is what we're doing, and this is how everyone will do Drupal front-end development in the future," right? There are structures and decision-making processes, and those need to be followed by very busy people. And
Yeah.
So that's a really great description of how core development work gets accomplished. So thank you guys both for working on that. So where does support stand for this in Drupal core? Do you still need a Contrib module in order to use it?
So obviously we don't need a Contrib module, right? Because it's in Drupal core. But right now it's experimental. So what that means is it's a separate module in Drupal core that you have to like go into the extend, navigation, and then you have to check it, and it gives you a warning, say, hey, this is experimental. Don't do this in production, even though it's like freaking awesome. It works great, and I'm using it in production. So like, but that being said, heads up on this, that like once we stabilize this, it is not going to be a separate module. So this is going to, like right now, it's a separate module because it is experimental. But once this stabilizes, it's just going to be part of the general theme system. It will always be turned on, and there's nothing you got to do except for just start using it.
yeah, and I could spell out the issue number for the roadmap to stability. Probably not very useful. Probably we can add that to the notes. But we have an issue. If you're so inclined and you want to contribute, I think we have a bunch of work ahead of us. We are thinking that long beta is best for this type of work, and we're just gathering input right now. And we're gathering input and making progress at the same time. Both things. We've closed a lot of documentation issues, but you never have enough good documentation. So go there and contribute if that's something that you want to see happening sooner rather than later.
And Mateu, Mateu, you mentioned long beta. So what are you thinking, like 10.3 or something like that to get it in? Or,
yeah,
or do you want to still try to shoot for 10. I know at one point we were talking about 10, but 10.2, and people were like kind of pushing back against that.
Yeah, I think that skipping at least one cycle would be best. Right? Yeah, and there are many people running this in production. Like this is more stable than many Contrib modules that we run in production, right? Mm-hmm. But still, it's marked as experimental because core has very high standards, understandably, right? And there are a few bugs here and there.
Is the decision to move it to core driven by the number of bugs there are, or is it more of you guys feeling like it's ready?
It's more the latter, and the recommendation of Catch, Nathaniel. He when we were marking this as beta, he was thinking, yeah, let's do this as a beta because there is not much of an API change risk here. But let's run it for a longer time than usual so we can get to all the ins and outs. Because like Mike mentioned, once it's made stable, you won't be able to disable it, just like you cannot disable the render pipeline. Or
that was going to be my question. Was like it's experimental now. Obviously, you can turn it on, you can turn it off, but like once it goes into Drupal core, it's just going to be there, right? That's going to be the way Drupal theming works. It's not going to be something that you can be like, oh no, I want to go back to the old way, right? So it's going to be something that people are going to have to like probably upgrade to. Yes, no.
I would say no. Like everything is going to continue to work, So like the way that you invoke a single directory component is just by like basically doing either a twig include or a twig embed from your normal template file. So like you'll have like, let's say you'll have your node --teaser --html.twig, and you want to load a teaser component. Like normally you would have maybe that your markup in that no dash dash teaser.html.twig. But instead of doing that, you would say like, you would do a twig embed, which is like a normal twig tag, and you would point that to the SDC that you want to load, and then the SDC would then like load any JavaScript, CSS, yada yada yada.
Right.
You can also invoke SDCs through what was it? They're what am I thinking? Not the render. I'm having a brain fart. Yeah. Thank you.
Renderable.
Yep. So you can do it that way too, but I like doing it like in a template because I'm more familiar with Twig and I'm more of a front ender. Does that make sense?
It won't break your current theme. It'll just be in addition to, you have the ability to kind of like enable it in your Twig templates and start using that directory structure and that structure of components.
Absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
A new feature,
Yep. So nothing is going to break. Nothing's going to break.
So is it possible to bypass the current templates? Like if you did a theme registry alter or something, could you take out the field templates and use only your components, or do they have to be called from a template or renderable to start?
Ooh.
You don't know yet.
No. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that makes my mind spin and makes me want to write another Contrib. Yeah, right now you start from a template, right? That's what we got into core because you gotta limit scope if you don't get anything done. So yes, you get it in there. You can add it as a renderable array as well, but that's just one level up or down depending how you look at it. But yeah, ideally in the future you will have different ways to add it. Let's say you could add some extra metadata that says whenever you see a field of this type, you use this component, right? This kind of stuff is still in the flux. Some of it has already started, and some of it just will happen maybe in the future. A lot of what we are hoping to accomplish, UI patterns, the UI suite of modules has already done from their perspective.
All right, I'm gonna try to channel my best Nick here, because as our listeners know, Nick is a huge proponent of web components. Mike Herchel, I'm pointing this one at you. Can you explain to us how single directory components are different from web components?
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I like how proponent and web component kind of rhyme, and I wish there was like a rap
Somebody
or
should
something.
put that on a t-shirt. Maybe you guys can, you can make t-shirts.
Yeah. So long story short, they're totally different. So like web components, in my opinion, are like horribly named. So web components is a suite of technology, like it's a group of technologies that allow you to do things like custom elements, encapsulation, HTML, or like templates. Shadow DOM and stuff like that. And it allows you to basically group a component into a JavaScript file, load some CSS, and there's libraries like Lit that help you do this. Web components are a technology that's supported by all browsers, but like the fact that like a component on the web is not a web component, which is like so dumb. Like web components were just named horribly. A component on the web is something like a card component, or a call to action component, a CTA component, or a button component, and then components can be nested. So a header component, a footer component, all these things are components, and then most of them are reusable. I want to reuse this card component and just swap out the data here and there and just use it in all different places. So single directory components is Drupal's implementation of the latter right there. So we want to enable regular components, easy to use, within Drupal, and we want to have a standardized way of doing that so the community can build off of that, through things like Contrib and all that,
So fair to say single directory components are more of the web implementation of design components, and web components are really like a grouping of technology in your browser.
Yeah, a specific technology, yeah. Now, there is nothing stopping you from using web components within your single directory components. So you can use all types of like modern JavaScript, including React, web components, Vue, Angular, anything like that in your regular single directory components. But it's just like the whole idea of calling a web component that is just dumb,
Do you envision Contrib space to include these components that you could install like you would with a module? Let's say there could be components of headers and cards.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Like other technology stacks have like shared component libraries. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason why Drupal can't do this. Like the technology, like SDC needs to stabilize, of course, and people need to figure out how they use that. But and like think about integrations with like recipes. I don't know if you're familiar with with what recipes is. It's basically a way to bring down a single grouping of functionality. What if recipes can include an SDC? And at that point, like the amount of work to style it would be minimal.
Yeah, and modules as well. Like let's think of a module. The media library, right? That's something that everyone is familiar with. Like we could use single directory components inside of the module, and then we could have like displaying the card for the media chooser, right? And then each theme, let's say Claro, could take that component and replace it, because Claro needs to do some special stuff in the way that it shows that particular card. So we can have modules and themes work together and override one another.
And as a programming note, Jim Birch will be joining us next week to talk about the recipes initiative. So we will definitely get into that. I think it's super interesting that you just mentioned that, Mike and Mateu, because like the way I'm thinking about this in my head is like, everybody's working with a design system. Design systems always are componentized basically. And then like a lot of people are moving those components into like layout builder blocks. And I see this as being like a very useful way to organize that information and that theme and to be able to, get all of the benefits from this using kind of some already pre-existing structures. So I think that's super interesting.
Does SBC make Drupal theming any easier? If so, how?
Yeah, like the easiest thing is if you have SDCs that you've already done. Like I'm using single directory components at my job, and I haven't been at my job for more than a couple months, but there's already cases where I've just copied and pasted one into another, made modifications that saved me a week's worth of work. Like that's the biggest deal. Now, granted, I could have done the same thing. But I would have had to copy. I would have had to copy, the template file, rename the template file, copy the CSS file, rename that. I would have had to copy create the library definition and all this type of stuff. And that fact right there makes it just a lot easier. And like something else is as a front end developer, we all know that like CSS is really scary to delete sometimes, because the nature of CSS is very global, and sometimes you don't know when that CSS is being loaded, where it's being loaded, what all it's affecting. Because of the nature of like an SDC being so componentized, you can be very confident that the CSS is only being loaded when the SDC is being there, and as long as you have the CSS scope properly, then it's fine. So it's very easy to there's some quote somewhere that says like, well organized code is easy to delete, and this is it.
I believe that. I'm also sorry. As you were talking, I just had the great realization that it's going to make editing CSS a lot easier because the last time, again, haven't edited or built a theme in quite a while, but the last time I did it, aggregation was turned on, and I was looking at something, and I'm like, oh, here's the style I need to update. Then I had to go shut aggregation off, figure out what file it was in, figure out where it was. Like, if you know what component you're editing, like you could just go to that CSS file and find the the property, right? Makes it a little bit easier for that theme developer.
I don't know. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a
Go
little bit.
for it.
I feel like, Mike, when you copied all those components, didn't you also have to copy all of the template files that were calling the component?
I mean, I copied like the embed file,
Yeah.
like the embed, and just did that. But that was honestly kind of straightforward.
As long as it seems like you still are going to have to do that painful process of like finding the right template file in Drupal with a naming convention or whatever. And then the components, I feel like there's going to be a huge benefit in sharing the same markup across multiple template files. So we don't have now with Drupal, you just write it over and over again, which is a big pain in the butt. But it still seems like you can't really skip the Drupal piece yet, which is why I was trying to get to the can you override it in the theme registry? Because I feel like if we could skip that, that would be a big time saver. But the CSS thing also makes me a little nervous. And this is probably just because I've seen a lot of bad CSS. But it seems like it would be really easy to not get your scope right because you don't know that this button is going to be on 8 pages and then the style for that button overrides other buttons. This is one of these things where if you are the architect of the CSS, you know exactly how it works and it's going to be fine. But when you hand that off to the next person, it's going to be really hard for that person who isn't going to know what component they're editing. They still have to go through that process of figuring out where that CSS file or where the component CSS is located. So I don't know. It seems like it's going to be very useful, especially for very big projects where you do have things like cards that are it's the same markup, but maybe, different configurations in different places used for different fields. Is it a block? Is it a paragraph? There's a bunch of stuff where you're going to get a huge consolidation of stuff. But it is also another level of complexity that we're adding. So I'm happy that it's backwards compatible in the way that people can kind of ease into it and figure out save them the most time and use it where it makes no sense.
One way of seeing it, I think, is it's like when you refactor your code. You have lines of code that are exactly or almost exactly the same in 7 or 8 different places, and you then refactor that into a function. And then, of course, you have to call that function from the original place, right? So the embed process is the calling that function from the original place. And the benefit of this refactor is that when you fix something, you fix it everywhere in your site. When you that thing that I think that part does make it easier. It is a very good point, the CSS scoping, right? SDC comes with an opinionated and totally optional way of scoping your CSS. It will give you some standardized structure that you can target in your components CSS to make sure that you are scoping it right? Of course, you can go off the rails and you can create those complex interactions between components that is very hard to detect, especially when you have editors putting components in a page and it fixed itself or it started breaking again, right? But it is something that was thought about, and there is a recommendation of a potential solution. However, I've learned with this process that front-end developers are very particular on their markup. You don't touch their markup.
I don't believe that at all. Any front-end developer I've ever worked with has not had an opinion, so to speak of. Sorry, continue.
And it's completely legitimate. What do I know about markup, right? I know about this problem, and I know about a potential solution to fix it, but it doesn't make sense to enforce it. It is in the docs how to maybe address that, but yeah, if the CSS is horrible, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really fix bad CSS, right? Like bad CSS is going to be bad CSS, but I wonder, I guess, like this clearly is a solution that you can't just drop in. Like you have to put some thought behind, and you kind of have to structure your project in the way of like, hey, we're going to use single directory components, and here's some documentation so that you understand what we're trying to achieve here on the project, right? It's not one of those things where you're just going to like drop it in there and like everybody's going to use it. Like it like the project code and the project structure has to kind of support that, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think my big concern comes from my personal experience of working with agencies that deliver Drupal websites. It's pretty clear after the fact that they didn't really know what they were doing. And so we have to take on and maintain those. And so that's how I end up seeing a lot of bad stuff, is you see what people do in their themes and you're like, oh my goodness. And now we're giving them another really cool tool that they're not going to go out and know how to use. And so I'm like, oh man, what am I going to have to maintain with this? But I do see, like, from our perspective of now taking that over, how that could be really beneficial, because we would be able to fix it much faster, and I will just replace this everywhere.
And the hope for that is, like, now there's like one standard way of making components. Like, Jen, I'm sure you've seen, like I've created components probably 2 or 3 different ways over the years, and you have to figure out how that's going. Now there's going to be one standard way of doing it, and this is going to be the best practice right here going forward. So, like, sure, they don't have to use it. Sure, they can continue to try to run their own component system. But the hope is that through, like, podcasts like this, they will learn about SDC and they will start using it.
All 5 of our listeners, again, will know all about SDC. I'm kidding. We have more than 5 listeners.
You're gonna get you're gonna at least get 8 listeners for this podcast.
Just because of you, we're gonna get that 3 listener bump, Mike.
Well, I was more thinking Mateu, but yeah.
Yeah, you're probably right. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, I think Jen, like I totally hear you. I actually just came off of a call with a client where we were talking about somebody implementing something in not necessarily the best way. But I almost, like, I don't know, maybe I'm eternally optimistic, where I'm like, yes, this will allow people to like do things better, right? But the other thing that I realize in having this conversation with you fine folks is that, like, it lends itself to a better organizational, like enterprise level solution, right? Because I think a lot of enterprises, again, as I said previously, moving towards like design systems and like this type of thinking and structure is really like, is really appealing, right? For a number of reasons. And I think we're highlighting a lot of them. So I think like that's going to help kind of push this forward. And get people on board with like, hey, let's do it this way, because it's gonna make things better for everybody. But again, I could just be being idealistic. I don't know.
Yep, I can see that. I can also see, like, just there's a lot of value in the ability to organize things however you want. I feel like having a long beta is also really good for this, because there's a bunch of stuff we can't imagine people doing with it. And through having that beta process, we'll start to see what people are doing that, be able to help make that process a little easier for everyone, a little more standard. So yeah, I'm excited about using it myself now. So thanks. Mike, earlier you talked about Schema for the SDCs. I don't know if either of you want to elaborate on why that's optional, what it is, and why it's beneficial.
I'll let Mateu take that one.
Yeah, I think that's also another way of simplifying the implications of being a front-end developer. So let me elaborate on that. It is adding some complexity from the implementation side. So what schemas are is that you take the time to think about, what is my component doing? What are the inputs? What's the data am I feeding to this card, right? Probably has a title, maybe has a link in there, and it also has an area where you can add whatever HTML you need to have go into that card, right? That would be a valid way of describing a card. So you take that reasoning about your component and you put it in a way that the system can understand it. You describe that the title is a string, that it has, you can add the max length, you can even enforce a certain format. And we do that in a language called JSON Schema because it's like super standard, it's everywhere, and many developers will be familiar with it, but maybe not everyone. So we take that and then we define the API of a front end piece, right? And that for me is huge because prior to this, every single element, class, anything in that markup was an API. So if anyone was building a top on top of something that you were doing, you changed a div and made it an article, you might have been breaking their styles, right? Right now, you're writing the API of that in a semantic way, so you can have a better time maintaining shared components. Either you share them across projects, either you share them with the community, like Stephen was suggesting earlier. That's what the schema is useful for, the first part of it. The other part is that once you describe it, you have like the heading being a string. You can go further and say, if I was to write a form for an editor to put a component in the page, right? Imagine a module that creates forms for components so editors can place them in the page, right? We can have those forms be auto-generated without any effort, right? Text field for the heading, WYSIWYG for that blob of HTML.
For those of you that are not watching the video, Jen and I's heads both just exploded based on the auto generation of edit forms. Continue, Mateo. Sorry.
And there is a contrib called SDC display that will do just that. It will let you create those forms, for instance, and map them to fields and stuff like that. I think that's an area where it has a lot of potential. Like you could have your front-end developers create components so they can map them in the templates. Like we said before, we call them like as the function that we refactored, but also those same components build up your repository of components in the site. And with the help of Contrib modules, you can have site builder, go into layout builder, and you can have, these components are creating blocks without any other effort than toggling on a module. You can have components be blocks, and then you drag them with layout builder into your page. So those kind of integrations are the end goal here, right?
Yeah, it just turns your front-end developers into back-end developers in a language they're already familiar with working in. That's awesome.
I want to add to all this that schemas, when you are creating a theme, schemas are optional. You need to have the component.yaml file there, but the actual schema does not need to be generated. So if you're not going to be sharing your components, you're not going to be auto-generating something, you just want to group it and have the developer a better developer experience without creating the schema, you are able to do that. Now, if you have your SDC in a module, schemas are mandatory. And in addition to that, if you want to override an SDC, the original SDC has to have a schema, and the new one has to have the schema to make sure they match.
Okay, so
those are a couple things you need to know.
Yeah. Let's dig into that one a little bit, because I think Mateo talked about this a little bit earlier. You just talked about it now, and that's kind of overriding the SDCs, right? So I'm going to kind of tie the two things that each of you said together, and then I'll ask my question, right? So Mateo was talking about modules or themes being able to override SDCs. Mike just said that in order to override an SDC, it has to have a schema, right? So like it is possible to override SDCs, right? But I guess like what are the use cases, or what are the thinking on the use cases for that? And what I mean by that is obviously like a module can define an SDC, right? So like if we were to talk about I don't know, let's do like a newsletter sign up module, right? Say the MailChimp module wanted to create an SDC for a newsletter sign up, right? But like for some reason I needed to add fields to that, or I needed to enhance that component, right? My theme could override that, right? How would I go about, I guess, doing that, right? So, well, first thing is that the module needs to have a schema, right? And then I just call that into my theme and then start editing it, or is there something else there that I may be missing?
Yeah, and that also highlights the importance of schemas, right? Because you want to make sure that if you are overriding some other module's component, that you're doing it right, that both components take in the same inputs, right? Going back again to the refactored function analogy, they always take the same variables, the same arguments, right? If the original changes the list of arguments, the one that you're calling with or overriding, then it's passing the wrong data, right? So that's why when you're doing these overrides, everyone involved should have the schema defined, and there is a layer inside of SDC that will assess compatibility between the two.
Let's define what we mean by override. Are we also saying replace?
Actually, that's even a better way of describing it, because it is replacing it. What you do is, let's say that the sign up component that you take from Contrib doesn't really work because you need some special markup for some wrapper, so to add some special CSS, because that's what you need to do on your site, right? What you do is you go into the MailChimp module, or whatever the hypothetical module is, you copy it, like literally copy the directory from there, and you paste it in your theme. And then just by doing that, you're using the component in your theme, because that takes precedence, right? So then you start tweaking it. And even when it's the MailChimp module calling the component, instead of calling the one that it provides, it will take Drupal will know. No, use the other one.
That's based on, hold on, one clarifying question there. That's based on the directory name or the YAML file inside that component?
The YAML file inside the component, yeah.
Got it.
So Mateu, there's the replaces key though that you have to define within the replacement. So it's like you have to copy and paste the single direct the SDC from the module into your theme, but then you have to edit the schema and say this replaces, and then the syntax is module name : that whatever component that is.
Yeah, and this is in the awesome docs that may need some help that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a case where we're going down the theming rabbit hole a bit here, but that's kind of what we do sometimes. So is there a case here where you can enhance a single directory component instead of replacing it? So take the first example, the example we just used, right? I need to redefine a schema. I'm going to do a replace, right? But say, hey, like a new example, I want to update a single directory component, right? So the hypothetical email sign up component does everything I want it to do. I just need to add 2 fields to it: phone number field and nickname field, right? Do I have to still copy the component and overwrite it, replace it, or can I append in some method?
You have to copy and paste the whole thing.
Okay.
And that was an intentional architectural decision, because we could do like we, and by we I meant Mateu, could have written something like, hey, I want to be able to load another CSS file, or I want to be able to load these extra schema stuff. But
Right.
the problem that presents is that, like, someone down the road, let's call this person Jen, is inheriting your screwed up site. They will have to figure out what's going on, and that'll make things like really, really complicated at that point. The benefit of having everything in one component is that you know where your data is coming from, you know where your markup's coming from, and your CSS is coming from.
Right. So it's similar to, like, how Drupal works now, where you want to overwrite a template file, you just move it into your theme and do it, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm also realizing here that Mateu is the muscle and Mike is really just the hype man, maybe, for this initiative.
I like that.
But I'm just gonna let the listeners figure that out.
I mean, I do like a lot of testing and throw out ideas on occasion, but I like the idea of hype man.
That's great. So you mentioned the SL server module, and you mentioned a module that automatically generates blocks from components. Are there any other useful Contrib modules that enhance SDCs?
I'd say that CL server and some of the modules that enhance SDC start with CL, because SDC is kind of the core adaptation of CL components. So those modules already existed, and there is a branch, a version 2 branch that is compatible with SDC. So CL Devel will kind of add some niceties on development experience, like it will generate a list of all available components. It will also highlight when you're using one component or another. It will describe graphically the schema that we talked about. It will tell you if someone took the time to say, this is a card and it has a heading. Well, it will spell it out for you, has a heading. So that kind of stuff. And SDC display will let you map components into field formatters with the graphical UI. So if you want to use my marquee component for your headings, you can have your text scroll across the screen. And then there will be one that will be SDC WYSIWYG, something like that will let you have a button and have a pop-up and like add my component here inside of the WYSIWYG. That one doesn't exist yet, but it will.
There's also we have a documentation page for this, which I just realized, Mateu, that your SDC display is not on this. But so if you go to the single directory components documentation, which is like under the Drupal theming section, we have like modules that extend single directory components. And listed in there is also, there's a module called SDC style guide, which will just output a list of your SDCs so you can kind of look at them. There's CL editorial, which is another Mateu module, and this is really cool. It's almost like a helper module for other modules. So, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Mateu, but let's say you have any type of UI now or in the future that you're going to select a list of single directory components from. You want that UI to look good. You want to, like, maybe a little grid with some checkboxes and little icons and all that other good stuff, and you want that to be standardized and accessible. That module will give you that, so you don't have to implement it yourself and save all that time. So there's a lot of stuff like this that's been going on. That CL editorial, I can see that being some core functionality sometime in the future. And there's also CL generator, which is a Drush command to generate a component. And I think, Mateu, you actually did don't you have an outstanding pull request for Drush where it can where Drush can create SDC?
Actually, Drush will be able to generate or scaffold an SDC for you without anything else installed. It's part of Drush 12 core now.
Yeah. So there's lots and lots of lots of momentum in the Contrib space around this type of stuff, which is like super exciting because I think that's like gonna like realize the real power of single directory components. And I have a lot of ideas in my head, around layout builder and things like the WYSIWYG and Gutenberg and stuff like that. So like there's tons of stuff to do, and it's all really exciting.
Do single directory components help out with headless at all?
No.
No.
Next.
Yeah. No.
But
Yeah.
we were talking about the web components earlier, and they have the merit of making Mike dislike their name. But you can also use them inside of single directory components. All the same, it won't help your effort of decoupling. But there is nothing stopping you from saying, my single directory component is a React component that I render, or a web component that I render. And then I pass data into that, because we know how to pass data into single directory components. So in a way, we are streamlining or standardizing the integration of the concept of components into Drupal. And I think, in my opinion, is a great way to plug your decoupled components if you already have them into Drupal.
That was kind of like my thought as we were having this conversation, and why I wanted to ask or have Steven ask this question was because like it feels to me like obviously it's not going to be like an assist on the front end, right? And if you're not using Twig templates in your decoupled, or headless architecture, like then that's not going to help all that much. But I feel from like an organizational and a data or data integrity standpoint to your front end, this could be super helpful.
Yeah, and I could see like from progressive decoupling, where you have a component that like loads data from like an external source or something like that. That's very, very like SDC would be very helpful for something like that.
Man, Mike, I feel like I feel like this could be your next blog post.
Oh man, I'm
good.
I'm behind on my blog posts.
All right. Well, maybe we'll see it. We'll see it in a couple of months then.
Everyone should subscribe to Mike's blog. I really like it.
We will, what we'll do? We'll put a whole list of links in the resources section to the modules that we talked about. Also, Mike, drop a link to your blog down there, and any of your favorite single directory component blog posts, and we'll send those out when we send the show out as well, so that way our listeners can read through on that stuff. Okay, as we bring this show in for a landing here, Mateu, you already talked about folks getting into the issue queue and helping out. Any other ways folks can get involved, help contribute to the single directory components efforts in Drupal core?
We'll take any volunteer labor for single directory components. This is just us. I take my sponsor time that Lullabot gives me, 10 hours a week, more or less, and put it mostly into this. But that falls short. Like, if you really want to see this happening, more people will need to step up. One very easy way to do it is to try it out. And we have an issue with, like, I think it's 4 questions that can be answered in less than a minute, and say like things about single directory components. That is feedback that we'll take to release managers, etc., and say, see, we cannot get this in. We need to change stuff. Or everything works. Let's get it in. Right? That's one thing. But to know about that, you need to go into the components channel in Slack, right? Join chat, maybe ask questions. And if you say, I want to contribute and I don't know how, someone will suggest something, right? Depends on like your skill set or your how you're versed into contributing to Drupal core. If you want to write a contrib, one of those cool contribs that need to happen, like that's another way to contribute, right?
So you're reading my mind, because I was like, oh, is there a Slack channel for this? And there it is. Jump into the components Slack, and I'm assuming that's on Drupal Slack, right?
Yes.
So on top of what Mateu talked about, like help spread the word about single directory components. The more people that use it, the better. The more people that create and share components. So like if you're going through the process of either creating your first single directory component or converting a component to using single directory components, write a blog about it. Throw that up there. If you're going to a Drupal camp, give a talk about single directory components. You could reach out to Mateu or I, and like we'll happily share like some slides with you and stuff like this. Give some presentations on it. Like people need to know about this. Like it's very easy for us who are like deeply involved in the Drupal community to know about it, but like so many developers are just there just working. They don't know that this necessarily exists anymore. Something else that helps out is like if you do something like really really dumb, and single directory components crashes, but it doesn't give a helpful error message, create an issue for that too. Like one thing that Mateu has really done that I really, really like about single directory components is the error messages are super helpful. They tell you where exactly you're screwing up. And but there have been times where like the error messages are just not helpful because Mateu, and despite his infinite wisdom, hasn't like foreseen people like screwing up like I can screw up. And so like once you track down what you did wrong, say like, hey, this I wrote a component like this. It really threw me for a loop. It took me like 2 hours to track down what I did wrong, and things like that are things that will help people in the future.
That's what makes Mike the best tester in the world, because nobody can screw up like he can screw up.
That is very true.
I'll say that in general. Sorry.
Go ahead.
We know that everyone's very busy and people are gifting us their time, and we'll take the hose of feedback in Slack and we'll slowly sift through it. And like that's our preferred way of getting it. You don't have to follow structure, know anything prior. Just go in there and get your feedback, ask your questions, say whatever you need to say there. And some people will create issues. Some people will work on those issues. And we have that going on. Like a lot of people are doing that kind of stuff. So if you just want to take that minute to give us the feedback, that could be the next stable blocker that we need to fix, right? And just drop a line in Slack.
All right. Mike and Mateu, thank you for joining us. And this conversation has been great. I look forward to hearing more about and playing with single directory components in the future.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was fun.
If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us on X at Talking Drupal, or you could reach us via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. The best place to connect with us is on Drupal Slack on the Talking Drupal channel.
Everybody's in Slack. It's the best way to connect with everybody. You, just like NetCamp did today, can promote your community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TDpromo.
Did you know there's a Talking Drupal newsletter? It contains more information about guest hosts, show notes, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. All right, everyone, you're almost out of here, I promise. The last part of the show here is the shameless self-promotion part of the show. Some may say the most important. Mateu, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Slack. And as much as I would like an open source alternative to that, I think Slack is where everyone is. The components channel, or you can DM me. I will probably politely ask you to repeat that question in the components channel. But yeah, that's a good way. And you can also find me in the fabulous Drupal.community Mastodon instance. If you don't have a handle there and you do Drupal, it's free. So
Yeah, get on Mastodon, folks. It's the way of the future. Mike Herchel, you once were on the DA board. You filled an at-large seat. Could you tell us a little bit before you tell us how to get a hold of you about the DA elections that are happening right now?
Yeah. I'm actually technically still on it too. My last meetings are going to be at the at DrupalCon Lil, which I will be presenting on single directory components there too. So as of today, we're recording on we're recording on Tuesday, September 23rd. Like elections for the at-large Drupal Association Board of Directors seat are open, and so the term is the board of directors has 12, 13 something people on there. 2 of those are elected by the community, and the terms are 2 years long, and they kind of overlap every year. So every year there's an election, and we can include a link in the show notes on where to go. You have to be a membership of the Drupal Association. You have to be a member of the Drupal Association to vote. If you're not a member of the Drupal Association, you can join. But at this point, if you join right now, you probably still won't be able to vote, because we don't want people just to join a whole bunch of fake accounts and then vote and do stuff like that. But it's important, there's a lot of really interesting decisions and kind of direction that me or the next person has input on when the DA meets, and we get to decide what are the Drupal Association's priorities. Right now we're very focused much on innovation and of course marketing, and all that needs to be done for Drupal. And so I want the next person to really hopefully go hard on both of those topics.
And if you are a Drupal Association member, you probably got an email. So this is just a friendly reminder to check your inbox for that voting link that Mike was talking about. Mike, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they best do that?
So my website is herchel.com. That's HERCHEL.com. My email address is mike@herchel. I'm on Mastodon at mastodon.social/mherchel. That's just because I don't really like Mateu that much. I'm still on Twitter or X or whatever the heck it's called now, even though it's getting more toxic by the day. And I think, and then of course I'm M Herchel in Drupal Slack, and
there you
anyone go. can bother me there.
Good deal. Jen, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you for the next 4 weeks. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to chat?
Best way is probably on Zulip, which is the open source alternative to Slack that Backdrop community uses. I'm also on Drupal Slack. I'm also on Mastodon. I'm on knock.social. There, and my username is Jen Lampton everywhere.
Cool. I hear that Backdrop is having an event in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, it's not this week, but next week. It's an entirely online event. Runs 24 hours a day for people in every time zone. 3 hours on, 3 hours off, so you don't have to go straight for 24 hours. There's an event this week too. Twin Cities Drupal Camp is happening if you're in the Minneapolis area.
Cool. We'll put links in the show notes for both of those events. Stephen Cross, as always, it's a pleasure to have you back filling in. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to chat?
Stephen Cross with a PH on X, Twitter.
I'm John Picozzi. I'm going to have to take a couple of breaths after that one. You folks can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com. Steven, you're up.
Yep. And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
Have a good one, everyone.